Thank you for coming this morning to our guest. And I think it's fair to say this is an issue that affects so many people that we know, affects so many of us as constituency MPs. It's an issue that's come across all of us as MPs in terms of our inbox. When you get an email from a constituent and you see some of the conditions that people are living in, you think, wow. In 2022, the predecessor committee, the Levelling Up Housing Communities Committee, had an inquiry on regulation of social housing, and that report concluded that the majority of homes were decent, that condition of some social housing stock had deteriorated so far as it to be unfit for human habitation. That was in 2022, and we know that the situation now in 2025 in some cases hasn't improved, if in some cases it's actually worse. Just starting off to, in terms of questioning, Kwajo, how would you describe the state of social housing in England today?
Well, I feel like a broken record. I've been doing this for 5 years. It's still appalling. The first half of this year has been the busiest that I have had in the 5 years that I've been campaigning. Some of the cases that I'm dealing with are far worse than what I was dealing with when I first started. I mean, there is still serious concerns surrounding health and safety of many of the residents that I deal with. A massive part of the issue is stigma, unprofessionalism, a lack of serious accountability and action. And it means tenants don't feel like things have improved. There's a lot of lip service, but from what I've seen, not enough action happening in terms of really tackling this crisis, especially more than 8 years on since Grenfell.
Richard, as the Ombudsman having to assess and look at complaints from residents up and down the country, how would you say the situation is?
So the volumes that we receive, I think, are indicative of the scale of the challenge. So we receive a phone call roughly every 25 seconds, a contact roughly every 25 seconds. I think we've seen some areas where there has been improvement, but from a position that no one would want, and that's probably on handling complaints themselves, where there's started early signs of improvement. But obviously by the time it reaches the complaints process, someone may have experienced a problem for a significant period of time. And I think what we're still seeing are very much the same challenges, that landlords are experiencing handling issues, whether that's poor communication, poor records, issues around level of responsiveness, inspections, risk assessments, and so on. I think just one observation I'd make is that we undertake further investigations into some landlords, and there's two very strong features where we do that. We do it when we see a kind of level of failing which is high, and there's two strong features: local authorities, and the other one is merged housing associations. About 83% of our further investigations have involved merged housing associations, and that's important in the context of significant structural change that we're going to see with the English Devolution Bill, a number of non-social housing local authority landlords joining those which are. That's a big shift. As well as potentially significant merger activity within the housing association sector. And that could be a real trigger of issues as well.
My massive worry is around homelessness and temporary accommodation. And in fact, when it comes to culture and stigma, I think it is so much more deep-rooted amongst local authorities in terms of poor performance and poor behaviour when it comes to stigma and culture. And I mean, I'll give you three examples that left me really, really angry, and they're recent examples. I had a mum and young son stuck in temporary accommodation, had been complaining about having no water coming into their home, which meant the toilet didn't fill up. They were having to defecate and urinate in bin bags and bottles for months, and the child had to go to school in order to shower. I also had, under another local authority, a man, he's Macmillan nurse, reached out to me. He had stage 4 brain tumour. He was homeless. They had to pause his cancer treatment because he didn't have nowhere to go back to recover. He had been presented himself as homeless to the council. They said they're not taking duty over him. So therefore he had to have his treatment stopped. I got involved, and then obviously things changed, but I've seen a lot of cases like that in terms of people terminally ill. And then recently I had a case of a lady who in fact I knew from a few years ago, fleeing domestic violence. She went to the council eventually, after a long period of going back and forth, put her into accommodation. She's an end-of-life carer, was trying to maintain her job whilst dealing with this, not telling people at work because she was embarrassed. End-of-life carer one day went into work, finished work at about 10 p.m, came back to her accommodation to find a half-naked man asleep in her bed and her belongings removed from her accommodation. She then, the next day, found out her belongings had been put into a cleaner's cupboard by staff members, and what the local authority had done was they had double booked the room and put a homeless man into her accommodation while she was out at work. And she was actually on the streets at the early hours of the morning trying to get help, in fact having to call the police to try and get assistance, and she didn't even get an apology. I put a complaint in to this council nearly 2 months ago, stage 1 complaint. I'm yet to still receive a response, and I'm happy to name the council. It's Lambeth Council. And I've been chasing the last few days in order to try and receive a response. But when we talk about culture, attitude, stigma towards tenants, this is what I mean, and it's so bad towards those that are homeless, some of the most vulnerable in society that don't even know where they're going to lay their head at night, often financially don't have enough money to pay for food, put clothes on their back, often have young kids who are being subject to the most disgraceful conditions, a lack of empathy, a lack of human decency and respect. And I'm seeing a lot of this under local authorities, and I've been saying this for years. Things need to change, and attitude, stigma and culture, it starts with government, it starts with the Secretary of State, it starts with the Prime Minister, and I don't think enough over the last few years has been done to start tackling this.
How effective do you think Arab's law, do you expect Arab's law be to prevent social tenants from being left in hazardous conditions that harm their health?
I mean, it's Arab's law. I mean, I've spoken to other parents in the past, and there are definitely many benefits to it. I think it's really, really important, in fact, but the massive question is how it's going to be enforced. And when it was first suggested, I certainly believed, and I know the sector did, that it was going to be implemented in its entirety. We now know it's going to be phased in over a number of years, which, I'll be honest, I wasn't happy about, considering the volume of people that I'm dealing with in terms of living in poor conditions. But it fundamentally, for me, comes down to enforcement and how it's going to be funded. Because if it's not, then unfortunately it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on. At the moment, there's no dedicated funding for enforcement. No proactive inspections or monitoring, meaning landlords may delay action, undermining the law's effectiveness. And my huge worry is around funding, especially for local authorities, because they will be dipping into their HRA in order to pick up for costs for this, and costs are soaring for local authorities. Income is falling and councils can't plug the gap. In January 2025, there was a report that found 91% of councils expect their HRA to be in deficit within 5 years without reform, meaning mounting debt, worsening homes, and they may have to consider selling stock or stop building altogether in order to balance the books. I mean, funding for this, and not just this, but the Renters' Rights Bill, is not an optional extra. It's something that has to be done if it's going to be effective. And if it's not, ultimately it will jeopardise the ability for councils to deliver new homes and undermines the government's ambition of building 1.5 million homes. But first and foremost, for me, it comes down to the health and safety of residents, and I worry that it's not going to do or go as far as it needs to in order to tackle the issue and the mounting issue that we are facing around conditions of homes that people are living in.
There's been change in the department recently. Have you had an opportunity to meet with the new Secretary of State, and is that something that you're going to pursue in terms of the campaign that you've been leading on?
We haven't had a formal meeting yet. Hopefully will, because there's still so many issues still outstanding, especially around the decency of people's homes. I mean, I've spoken to many MPs who say these issues take up the majority of their casework. And to make that point, that more needs to be done under local authorities in terms of setting a standard for them to follow, because human decency and respect and treating tenants with that doesn't cost nothing. But also that question that I still have around social housing and how many are going to be built. I mean, I think we're about 16 months into government now. We're still no close to understanding out of the 1.5 million homes, how many is going to be social housing, knowing that we've got record levels of child homelessness, homelessness in general, and to start tackling this crisis, it starts with building quality, long-lasting social housing, but we're still no closer to finding out how many of those are going to be built. So there's so much that I want to speak to the government about, and I do want them to deliver, I really, really do, but if they're going to, they need to do it in the right way, and they need to start treating this with urgency, because there's been a lot of lip service, there's not been enough action, I'm afraid.